award-winning Tennessee WildCast is on the air with the latest on hunting, fishing, boating, wildlife watching, and all things outdoors. Make welcome your host, drummer and outdoor expert novice, Jason Harmon.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of Tennessee WildCast. We're glad you're tuning in. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. It's going to be a fun show today. We are at the Region 3 office in Crossville, Tennessee, and Miss Mime Barnes has invited us in, and we got a great show for you. Glad to have you, Mime.
It's so fun to do the show, Jason. Glad you're back.
Yeah.
Have great company with us today.
Yes, Luke Hadden, right?
That's it.
And he's our wildlife manager, forester on Catoosa.
Yep.
And we're going to talk about forestry today. Trees and all kinds of fun stuff.
Who knew we had foresters?
And who knew we had a whole lot of trees?
A lot.
This is going to be a fun show, I can already tell. So anyway, Luke, I want you to kind of give us a background on yourself. Tell us about yourself, how you started with the agency, and what brought you to Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, and we'll just get started there.
All right. Well, actually, I was born and raised in Vermont.
I didn't know that.
There you go.
Yeah,
Something new.
So I am a Yankee. But my passion in high school was I was just outside all the time, and I actually got recruited for the track and field team at Wake Forest University over in North Carolina.
I didn't know that either.
I'm glad we had this interview set up.
He's fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I threw things, so I'm not that fast. But so wound up over at Wake Forest over North Carolina, and was a bio and environmental science major.
Oh.
And my advisor did wildlife management on the Serengeti. And so,
Wow.
Yeah. So got a lot of cool stories and advice from him. And there was one day I just went to him and said, I want to do something natural resource related. And being a biology major, he basically told me, you could do it here, but it would be tough. So I looked to transfer, wound up at University of Tennessee, finished my...
Go Vols.
Yeah.
Right.
So lots of orange in my house. Basically wound up there, did my last 3 years there, was on the track team there as well. Graduated in 2014 with a degree in forest resource management. Got hired on the exact same, pretty much the day after I graduated. I was a wildlife manager once.
Hired the day after graduate. Is that dreamy?
Oh, yeah, that's awesome.
It's dreamy.
It made taking finals pretty tough because I had already interviewed, and they called me to say, we're seriously considering you. And basically, my hiring was dependent on me passing all my classes, which that wasn't of concern, but it still put pressure on it. So.
Yeah, I believe it, yeah.
But
that's great. I mean, what a success story. We don't all have that story. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So, like I said, graduated in 2014. I actually met my wife at UT, and we were just friends at that point, went separate ways, came back together, and we're married now. So,
and here on the plateau with us.
That's it.
That's fantastic.
But basically started at North Cumberland WMA up in Campbell County, May of 2014. Did 4.5 years up there. I was the wildlife manager one, wildlife forester one, kind of the same position, but. So start off there. A position came open over here at Catoosa. It's much flatter. The ground's a little easier to walk on.
You think Catoosa's flat?
Compared to North Cumberland, it is.
It is.
But so basically wound up over here. Just finished up December 27th was a year. So I've got a year and a couple months. So I've got a full cycle of a full work cycle put in, and I love it. I seriously could see myself retiring here and wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
Yeah, we hear that a lot, don't we? I mean, so many employees, you get your job, it's your dream job.
We've got guys at Catoosa that have been there, we've got one guy that's been there over 40 years.
Wow.
So there's a lot of history, a lot of wealth of information. It's good to be surrounded by guys that have... care about the area and have a rich history of it. So.
Yeah. I always try and impress upon people we do it because we love it, and our goal is never to let it fail. I mean, we love it. So I appreciate you sharing that. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah. So North Cumberland, that's a big piece of property.
Yeah.
How does that compare to Catoosa now? What's the differences in acreages there?
So North Cumberland's about 189,000 acres. We don't do forest management on all of that. Back in the day when it was just Royal Blue, it was 56,000 acres. So our footprint for forest management is kind of within the original Royal Blue property. the Catoosa Forestry Management Program is much older. It was actually started in the 80s, whereas North Cumberland, didn't really even become a WMA till mid-90s, I believe.
Right.
So in terms of forest management, there's a lot more history here. And so it was cool to start off at North Cumberland, kind of the birth of a management program. Again, forests grow for a long time. So to see and be a part of the beginning, and then to come into Catoosa, which is, 40, 45 years in the making. It was cool to kind of fast forward and see all that work that I did on the front end to see it halfway through.
Wow, yeah. So you're seeing the completion of your work in a sense on a different WMA.
Yeah,
that's a pretty cool way of looking at it too. What do you enjoy most? You've touched on a little bit, but what do you really enjoy about the job then?
Well, if you ask my wife or my boss, I can't sit still for more than about 5 minutes. So just the fact that I can be outside every day, I'm walking around, I would go crazy if I was at a desk all day.
Yeah.
And the fact that I can just be outside in the woods.
Hands-on.
Yeah. It's just.
Very cool. Very, very cool. So we talk about forestry. We talk about a forester. What do you do? So we know trees, forest, get that part of it, but give us a little bit more detail about really the definition of what you do and what your job is.
So essentially any forester, if you had them on your private property, if you had them on state forests or agency-owned land, the first question they're going to ask you, what's your management goals? What's your objectives for the property? Because again, if you're managing for one species, what you do to the forest is completely different than a different species that need a different type of habitat. So again, setting that goals and objectives, which we'll talk about later on, but those goals and objectives are huge for what we do.
So you help people set those objectives, or you listen to the objectives and then say, okay, here's your forestry plan?
Both. So Tennessee Division of Forestry, TDF, who deals more with the public, they will ask you, what are your goals and objectives? Like I said, when the forest management program was birthed in the 80s, they sat down with area managers, regional biologists, and we got their objectives and then carry out those objectives.
Okay.
So, again, and that was one thing that I want to make sure we really stress today is we don't cut, we don't have to cut a certain acreage per year. We don't have quotas on how much money we need to make. All of what we do is strictly based off of creating wildlife habitat.
Yeah, we've said that over and over, and we'll push that to the end. Like, it's not about money, it's about wildlife equals habitat. I say that if you see a post, wildlife equals habitat, because we know without the proper habitat, we're not going to have the wildlife that we're interested in having, and regardless of what that is.
Right. And that's not to say that, we need to go convert everything to early successional, but on the flip side, we don't need, Catoosa's 78,000 acres. We don't need 78,000 acres of mature closed canopy forest.
Yeah.
But we also don't want 80,000 acres of clear cut either. I mean, so we need to strike a balance with that.
So we've touched on this a little bit too, but when you are looking at Catoosa from that forestry management standpoint, what does make it so special?
So basically, in the 80s, when the forest management program got going, they sat down and basically the program started with Cheatham WMA over near Nashville and Catoosa. So foresters were hired there, and then they started carrying out. So again, Cheatham and Catoosa, that was the birth of the forest management program.
And the outcome was, what wildlife do we want on Cheatham, and what wildlife do we want on Catoosa?
And how can we manage? Basically, we work for the agency, but we're basically a consulting work unit. So you come to us and you say, we need X, Y, Z, and we say, okay, here's what you need to do to get there.
Okay.
But
you're also implementing that work.
Correct.
Right. Yeah.
So we work with those area managers, the regional biologists, to write the plan. So generally, if you were one of the regional biologists, you come to me and say, I want to manage for species A. Well, we come in, we write a management plan, and then we operationalize that plan.
How many guys do you have on your crew? Are there multiple foresters that work under you, or do you utilize the managers on the property and technicians?
So At North Cumberland, we've got 2 foresters and 1 technician. And then at Catoosa, we've got 2 foresters and 1 technician as well. And actually, my supervisor, who is the East Tennessee forestry supervisor, is stationed at Catoosa.
Okay.
So technically we have 3, but there's 2 on-the-ground foresters that are out every day.
Not very many.
No, it's a lot of work for a few guys.
Yeah. So
Good thing you don't like to sit still.
yeah. We'll talk a little bit more about the history of Catoosa later on, but it was amazing. When we first got the property in the late 40s, students from Suwanee actually came out and did a full east to west, north to south inventory of the entire 80,000 acres.
So did that help? So I'm looking at some of the questions that we had for you, and one of them is how to determine those management goals. So when you look at that piece of property, I mean, some people automatically know, I want more deer, or I want quail, or I want turkey, and you have those management goals. Did that survey and knowing what wildlife was there help guide the management plan for Catoosa?
So essentially what happened, and we'll dive into the history. So,
Okay.
Let's hit it.
fun.
Yeah.
all right. So the state bought Catoosa in the late 40s. In the early 50s, that's when the Suwanee students came out and they did that inventory. I actually found a map from 1964 yesterday in our office. That,
Cool.
it's about this big. And but it's got forest cover types, the size of the trees standing, so a size of the timber, as well as a stocking. So, you can have a whole bunch of big trees, but if there's not a whole lot per acre, things like that. And it's colored, and I'm actually going to go and get it laminated today.
Oh,
So
very
it
cool.
was one of those maps that I found and was like, this is a gem.
Yeah.
So they came in, they did this inventory, and that inventory led from the early 50s through the mid 60s, where they basically went through, they identified areas that were heavily stocked forest, and they went out and thinned them. Same thing, actually, we have a map laminate currently of the cuts from 1952 through 64.
Wow. Be great visuals to get for
Yeah.
Yeah.
our website or Facebook. Or
And I'm not sure where she was from, but I believe there's a PhD student that did some research on those cuts on Catoosa and, where they were at today and their current health and stocking and things like that. So she was able to convert a hand-drawn map to basically an ARC map, ArcGIS, use that to put it on a current overlay of the area.
Wow.
So it's cool to go out, you can say, okay, this cut was in 1952, and then go out in the field and actually look at it.
So what's cool about that is because your work, when you're creating habitat, and I know we'll dive into this a little bit more, but when you're creating habitat, it doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
It's not like a haircut.
Yeah. So that's one thing, too, that I really want to stress is that, we're putting the forest on a 100-year rotation because, again, that's about how long it takes for trees to mature and, fully close canopy. But you also have to keep in mind that oak trees, the trees that produce acorns, the crown jewel for deer hunters, essentially, acorn production drops after 80 years. And on top of that, not every oak tree is a great producer of acorns.
And it's only a certain time of the year too.
Right.
It drops and produces.
So you've got, and some of those red oak acorns will, persist through the summer or into the winter and through into the spring.
Okay.
But, like this year at Catoosa, and there were pockets that were great producers this year. But for the most part, we had a really wet spring, so they had trouble, pollinating. And then we got that drought going into, it was around Labor Day week. So there was a lot of stressors on the oak trees this year. And so they dropped all their acorns, but believe it or not, deer, turkey, squirrels, they can all tell which acorns are good and which ones are bad.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah. So we went out in the woods and, we'd see, oh, this tree was a great producer this year. And we'd look on the ground and we'd scoop them up and we'd do a float test on them. And again, so good acorns sink because they're dense and they have that, carbohydrate. And
It's good stuff.
Yeah. So, and then the bad acorns float because generally it's an underdeveloped embryo is essentially what it is. And all those acorns that were left all floated. So we had post oaks, which is a great nutritional, acorn, but thousands of them that were bad that
So
never
not
got
usable.
eaten. Correct.
Yeah. Would you sink or float, Jason? I'm hoping I'd sink.
I think I would sink.
That's great. That's great. I mean, how interesting. So you're a hunter, you're out there in the woods, you're seeing all these acorns still laying on the ground this time of year. It might be a clue. And it was a really hard year. I know throughout Tennessee, but here on the plateau too. I mean, last February, we're kind of repeating it this year. That pattern so far, overwhelmingly wet February and spring, and then we went right into a very severe.
Yeah, and we had, I know, out on Catoosa, we had a lot of, food plots that we planted this year that, pretty much our target date, our first draw hunt on the area is towards the end of September. So by Labor Day weekend, we want to get 99% of what we're going to put out in the ground. That gives it 3 weeks to green up and look good. Well, we put stuff out that it still hasn't even germinated.
Wow.
We plant purple top turnips out there that, by now they should be big and bushy and looking good, and they're still about that big and about that, they're just, it was hard.
The conditions, it's hard, yeah.
That's the hard part of management for an agency. We catch slack sometimes for that, but we're so dependent on the environment around us. So I want to go back to something because we're talking about that mast. So you've thrown out these terms, static versus dynamic management to us, and then we often hear about mast production. So I don't care which one, but let's talk about those things, that static versus dynamic management and what that means. You've talked about a little bit about how to determine management goals on Catoosa as a forester. So what animals are we looking for on the landscape? What do we want? And we can guess what that is as a wildlife agency. We're looking for those big game, but we look at small game too. But let's start with that and help us understand that a little bit better when it comes to forestry.
Okay. So actually, I'll take one step back and go back to the management goals and objectives. Again, our job, set forth by the folks in this office and the folks in Nashville, that they want to manage the forest for every species. We're not, we don't want to get hyper-focused on deer or hyper-focused on quail or even, a type of woodpecker. We need to manage, and again, it's difficult, if not semi-impossible, to manage every acre of every WMA for every species.
So foresters aren't magic.
So, and that's why we need we're not painting with a tiny watercolor brush. We're painting with that 6-inch stain brush, and we're laying it down. Because again, we're rotating the forest. My boss has a great term of, we've got, Catoosa is an old folks home when it comes to a forest. We've got a bunch of very over-mature timber out there.
Which you said aren't once they reach 80 years old, they're not producing the acorns that we want them to.
And you've got to keep in mind, too, that red oaks are susceptible to disease, wind damage, weather events after 120 years. White oaks will hold on a little bit longer. But again, so if you've got a forest that's 150, 160 years old, those red oaks are starting to fall out. And, they're producing acorns. It's a nutritional, boost going into the wintertime. But if they're dying out and they're hollow, which again, there's species that use that, and that's one thing. But again, you don't want 80,000 acres of hollow red oak trees. So, and that was the one tough thing too. So going back to the history, these thinnings that they went out and did, the forest was overstocked. So there was a lot of large trees per acre.
So overstocked meaning that large number of trees per acre, too many
trees. Again, they're all fighting for sunlight. That canopy is closed and there's nothing growing on the understory. So they went in, from 50 to 65-ish, and they started doing large-scale thinnings. And I couldn't find any paperwork on what their goals and objectives were, but I can tell you the white oak market was probably pretty good because a lot of Catoosa is left over, large, gnarly chestnut oak trees and red oak trees. But again, those red oak trees probably should have gotten thin back in the 60s, but they had different management goals and objectives. So
today,
all of that to say.
Woo!
So today,
it's good to know the history, though, right?
So we are trying to manage not every acre, but the area as a whole for all wildlife species. So again, that's species that, need that 1 to 2 year old clear cut, species that need that 15-year-old clear cut, and then all the way up to species that need that closed canopy forest. So again, that's what I'm saying. We don't want to, we're not out here to, we're not going to start on the west end of Catoosa with a chainsaw and start lopping it all down.
But that different age class, and I'll ask you to help define that, means something. And before we got started here, Jason, I know I mentioned it's as if every flower bloomed at the same time.
Right.
All the pollinators, everything that utilize those would be really happy for that time, and then afterwards, it'd be terrible.
Right. So I wish we had a whiteboard. We could do a little math here. My wife's a math teacher, so we both love math. I geek out about it. But so we're gonna talk about some numbers right now.
Okay.
So Catoosa, like I said, it's 78,000. We'll say 80,000 acres, just for a nice round number. We've got 27 compartments that we manage on Catoosa. That 27,000 or 27 compartments is actually about 27,000 acres. So again, we're actively managing less than half of the forest on Catoosa. So there's a misconception, we're out there, we're cutting every tree down. We really manage, whatever 2780 this is as a percentage. So 27 compartments, 27,000 acres, that's about 1,000 acres per compartment. This is where the math is going to get heavy. So, like I said,
I'm going to keep up. I'm going to keep up.
So we've got 1,000-acre compartment. We go in and we harvest, regenerate the forest, take it from that old, I'm not going to say old growth because it's all been cut before, which is whole nother history lesson. But we've got mature closed canopy forest that we're resetting back to year 0 of forest succession.
And how important going back to 0 is.
Right. Essentially, it's any population dynamics. You don't want to be heavy on the, older, mature, whatever you want to call it, trees, deer population. You want an even, you want that that base pyramid. So again, back to the numbers. So 1,000-acre compartments. We go in and we regenerate 10% of that compartment every 10 years. So
not very much.
Not very much.
Sometimes you can see it from the road, though.
So here's the thing that you've got to keep in mind. Think about what vehicle hauls logs off of any log site. That's a pretty big truck. You're not going to take it out on a 4-wheeler trail. If we could get logs out on a 4-wheeler trail, we would. But if you're going to cut, and I'll say substantial areas, 20 to 35 acres, you're going to be hauling it out on tractor trailer. Which actually, a side note, so all of these secondary roads on Catoosa, we've got about 75 miles worth. If you go out there, all the roads that have cables on them were actually laid out and built by the forestry work unit. So before then, we had the main roads going down the heart of the area, the big wide gravel roads. But
you needed access.
We needed access to get into these compartments that we manage. So actually all of our secondary roads are built to DOT specifications. So you're able to get its grade, its turns, all of that. You can get a tractor trailer truck on every one of our secondary roads.
How important that is. You hear 25, 30 acres, and for someone that might live on an acre or in a city lot, that sounds like a big number. But when you're talking about 80,000 acres, and you want that different age class of woods, it doesn't seem like very much all of a sudden.
So again, those numbers, so you're talking 10% of 1,000 acres, you're talking about cutting 100 acres a year, which, that, even if you own 25, 30 acres, you look around, this is 3 times what I own, and they're cutting this. But again, you zoom out, that 100 acres out of 80,000 acres. That's, So again, it looks devastating. One of the best quotes that I had at UT was Dr. Alan Houston out at Ames Plantation. He said that think about any birthing process. No birthing process is a pretty thing in the very beginning. But that's what the birth of a forest is.
Yeah.
And, all the mature forests we have now were reset at one time.
And how important that reset is. I just, we hear the statistic over and over again, what young 3 to 5-year-old forest or new growth might produce versus that 80 to 100-year-old forest. Just so much different in production of food for wildlife.
Well, you need to keep in mind, too, I won't say most, but there's a lot of species that are browsers. I always tell kids when I go and do, I&E stuff,
Communications and outreach now.
Close your eyes and picture your dream forest. Most of the time it's real big, tall trees. There's a little bit of sunlight filtering through. And you're walking through and you're crunching on the leaves. Well, if you're any species of wildlife, that needs to eat green stuff, look down at your feet in your dream. There's no green there. And so, sometimes we can simply just burn through to burn off that leaf litter and we'll get that flush of growth. But again, it's closed canopy forest. Plants need sunlight to grow. So again, that's why on some of these static projects that we'll talk about, we go in and we'll thin and we'll burn, and we're taking a snapshot of succession. We're holding it in that 3 to 5 year growth range and not letting it advance to mature forest because, like you said, that 3 to 5 years, that window that's so vital for everything.
So really quickly, what is mast and the difference between, you just touched on it, but what's the difference between, what is mast and what's the difference between hard and soft mast?
Okay, so hard mast, acorns, hickories, that hard nut that wildlife eat. Our main driving factor for the forestry management program, again set forth in the 80s, was to reproduce an oak hickory forest. So hard mast for us is the Mac Daddy, it's the king of what we're managing for. Soft mast is, I hate to say it's kind of like the candy, but think about persimmons and crab apples, even holly trees. Again, that's that soft fruit. It's not going to last as long. I've got a persimmon in my yard that it seems like every time that I mow, I'm just shooting out persimmon mist everywhere. But I have deer like crazy. But right now that there's no persimmons on the ground, because they're gone already,
Short
I
window.
don't have any deer. So it's again that soft mass is nutritious and it's great for them to have. It's that quick burst of energy, but it's not a sustained like the red oaks are. Those acorns that last forever through the winter and into the spring.
So that's good to know. When we look at that and we talk about static versus dynamic management, I want to get back to that because those are terms, you throw those terms out all the time, but in a nutshell, what's static versus dynamic management?
So again, dynamic, we're recycling that forest. We're taking the old folks' home worth of the forest and resetting it back to the newborn babies.
Okay.
So again, we need that, that pyramid and, getting that forest recycled. Static management, again, we're taking that snapshot, that 3 to 5 year window, letting it grow up, and then using prescribed fire to knock it back down. So again, it's keeping that flush of new growth, it's burning off the old, letting that new flush of green come up.
Cool.
Man, there's so much to tell.
lot.
You got to come back.
I hope I can, because I think we got through half of my
Show
questions.
2 with Luke will be on the property maybe.
That'd be
we could do
great.
that.
We'd love
Yeah.
to come up and visit you there.
We've got 2,600 acres slotted to burn on the Savannah this year, so
Wow.
we'll be there.
It'll be a great video.
Yeah.
It's been great. Thanks for having us. Thanks for being a part of this. And
Yeah, thanks for
letting
having me.
folks know about it.
A wealth of
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yeah.
Great knowledge. If folks have questions, they can reach out.
Yeah.
Call the Region 3 office. We'll get
Yep.
you in touch.
And I encourage, again, these conversations are difficult to have because, again, forest management is kind of a hot button topic. But, if you get drawn on a quota hunt or you're out on the turkey hunt in April, stop by our office. I encourage you to come talk to us. We'll ride around and we'll look at stuff. And
Cool.
Awesome.
So.
Right around.
Thanks
Sounds
for
like
being
fun.
here. Thank you for what you
Yeah.
do. Thanks for being willing to come on and share your great knowledge. We
Yeah.
appreciate
So.
it a lot.
Thank y'all both. Thank y'all for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on Tennessee WildCast.
Thanks for tuning in. Stay connected with TWRA by visiting our website at tnwildlife.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hey, it's all about Tennessee wildlife. It's what we do. Tennessee WildCast will be on the air again next week. We'll see you then.